So you collected some data,
Down.
some of which may be textual, that you've done a transcription of an interview, others of which may be visual. And the question came up earlier, maybe it was your question, how do you deal with visual material and code it? And let me just show you some examples of something. This on the left is some procedures that we might use to make sense of data, to begin to go through a coding procedure. And in what's called grounded theory, we begin with open coding, where we're coding anything and everything. If you're members of your group sitting around, you're saying, we should look at this code, we should look at that code, just tossing everything out that might work and attaching it to particular pieces of data, which might be a paragraph, it might be a sentence, it might be even just a word. And then axial, we begin to make more sense of the data by collapsing some of the small codes together or expanding some of the big codes into multiple coding categories. We're beginning to structure a little bit. And then selective coding is beginning to tell a story of how this all fits together. And so we're thinking in terms of broad themes that we're going to put into the presentation. But then there's a further stage of abductive analysis. And see the illustration on the right. I'm going to ask you some questions about that in a minute, and how we might go about understanding that abductively. Abductively means that we're standing back from it and trying to make sense as a whole of what's going on here, and saying this would be understandable if only we adopt this mindset, this particular thematic analysis. There's some initial aids that we'll look at, like Leximancer, which is a computer program for trying to make sense of qualitative data, as are in vivo, which used to be called Dudist, Atlas TI, which is a German brand. In vivo is out of Australia. The Xi-Index and DT Search are programs that basically search through your data for combinations of words using Boolean logic. This and this, or this, but not this, things of that sort. And there are other programs of that sort. It's fine to use them. I've seen some very interesting results coming from those approaches to data. I don't use them. I sort of go through by hand and try to keep more of a first-hand contact with the data. But you're welcome to try them. For this project, it's probably more work than just going through by hand and trying to make sense of things. At any rate, the illustration on the right is by Wang Guoji, who's a famous Chinese artist. What do you think that image is about? It's a painting. It's a painting by Wang Guoji. What do you think that painting is saying? Yeah.
Coca-Cola stand by with the movement of their identity, that is communist philosophy, that is a common drink for the common people.
Okay, that's a very interesting interpretation. Coca-Cola, because these are a people's movement under Marxism, communism, that Coca-Cola is a powerful product for the people. Any other?
So revolution through education, because we can see that that's actually what they are holding, and there is one book in.
Okay, so this looks like education. He's holding a particular book, which looks like it has a red cover. I don't know if any of you know Mao's little red book. Chairman Mao used to have different sayings by Chairman Mao in a red book, so that may be what it is. But education, right? It's a particular form of political education in this case. This type of painting is called communist realism is one word for it, because we have capitalist realism as a style of painting as well. But in this particular case, it's putting together something from old mainline communism, people's movement, but also the Red Guard was a sort of brutal movement during the Cultural Revolution. These are the old hats and caps and uniforms, basically, that people wore, sometimes called the Mao jacket, but it's really Sun Yat-sen. And at any rate, this style of painting would be used to critique the elitist writing, and so they're holding a pen rather than just the flag standard. And Coca-Cola sort of is jarring in this painting. You're putting together this hardline Marxist imagery with Coca-Cola, which is a Western product that's come in only after China began to loosen up. And you can see in other paintings by this artist sort of what he's getting across. And so this is called Great Criticism, Coca-Cola. This one, Critical Realism, is the title for the style here. This one is similar sort of theme of McDonald's. And here's another version of Coca-Cola, and again holding up the red book. And there's numbers here. We have to maybe figure out what those are all about. Here's one for Swatch, no Swatch pop. This is also a form of pop art, sort of like Andy Warhol. And in fact, there's one against or for Andy Warhol here as well. So by looking at multiple instances of the painting of this particular artist, he's become quite popular. His work sell for about $1 million US. And so it's interesting, it provokes attention, it juxtaposes two things that don't seem to readily go together. And is this criticism, is this comedy, is this shock, or is this the gradual absorption of Western brands? Just what is going on here? It's an interesting question to ask. I mentioned Lexomancer. This is from a project that we did on religious objects on automobiles and the fronts of houses in Pakistan. And so we put all of this together and our field notes, and we put it into Lexomancer, and it clustered together things that seem to go together. And so one is about things, people and specific objects that they buy or that they take or present. One is about prayer, and you can see these are overlapping a little bit, and the Quran is there. Whoops, it's going ahead too fast. And caps and heads and places and so forth. And one is about the Prophet, peace be upon him, is the PBUH here. So here's Allah, linked to name, linked to time, and use, and so forth. I wouldn't say that this is a complete analysis tool. It's telling us just what co-occurrence of words go together, or objects, if it's able to analyze visual objects, which increasingly it can. And so it's a starting point. It's not an ending point, it's not a final analysis, but it sort of gives you an idea what are some of the clusters of things that we're talking about that seem to go together in terms of word proximity. These tend to be, and you can also tweak it. You can say, using Boolean logic, show any instances of this within 5 words of this, and you can vary the number of words and so forth. But it's beginning to suggest a pattern. This is another project on thresholds. And you can, these are all Indian thresholds of homes. One on the upper right is the entire home. But we're looking at images. So here's Ganesha, here's Rangoli, other terms for it as well. You probably see more there. What is being communicated by these doors? Are they welcoming? Are they trying to prevent? Welcoming. Okay, what can you see that's telling you that? Sorry, one?
The door is open.
The door is open, okay, here on the left.
Yes.
What else shows you that
The
these are welcome?
different kinds of traditions they follow, like Rangoli and other decorations.
Okay, so the Rangoli is, where would you see that in India? What text of the book?
It welcoming the guest as the God. We say
Okay.
Atiti Deva Bhava.
Okay, so these aren't signs that are saying stay away, private, keep out. They're welcoming people in. Are any of them bringing goodwill? Are these positive?
Yes.
Yes.
Your culture side to this.
Lord Ganesha, okay.
Mango leaves.
Rangolis, okay.
Mango leaves. The leaves on the door.
The leaves on the door, okay. Oops,
Yeah. Just
okay, that's where we were. Is there a name for the leaves on the door?
the right bottom is mango.
Mango leaves.
Mango leaves.
Mango tree.
Mango.
Leaves of the mango tree.
Okay, and what does that say? What does the leaves of the mango tree convey?
Auspicious.
Auspicious. Okay.
Also, it's freshness.
Freshness?
Yeah.
Okay, good. At any rate, we're
And
looking at...
it's also portraying the Hindu traditional culture.
Okay. I don't think we could, if we had knowledge like you collectively have here, maybe just interpret these in terms of how they look. But what we're doing is also talking to people about what does the threshold mean, who decided, how do these change over time or during the year, and so forth. So we're looking at the notion of threshold as a place between outside and inside, and the message that they're conveying to people, and what they're trying to bring to the household or keep at bay in the household. Here's another project. This is during Durga Puja in Kolkata, and this is the normal sort of pandal that you might have. This is Puja, this is Ganesha, this is Mahisa.
Mahishasura.
Yeah, so the demon who's being slain by
The buffalo devil.
Durga. But this, during COVID, is how one of these changed. And so here, Ganesha is sort of a service worker, first frontline responder. And here, Durga has various implements to battle COVID. And Mahisa is now the virus. And so it's being slayed. So there's a whole medical team here. And down here, there were the workers who had to walk home
Yes.
because during the lockdown, they had to get back home somehow. And she's carrying her children along, and Durga's protecting her, and so forth. So this was another project. Let me show you a little bit more of it. We drew on some media sources here, and so we documented for a paper what those media sources were, when they occurred, where they occurred, and we did the same. I think Modi asked to light diyas and also at 9 o'clock in the evening, or 8 o'clock in the evening, do this and
COVID,
for a
yes. During
certain...
the lockdown, yes.
Yeah.
And also
Yeah.
to ring the...
Yeah, bang the pan, yeah. So this was a way of having collective spirit and saying people are doing something rather than just passively sitting back. We also looked at fire rituals or havans and where those were taking place, and devotional songs or bhajans, how they had changed during COVID as well. So we're trying to show that rituals are not in place forever in a particular way, that they tend to change and adapt, and in this case change to the circumstances of COVID. And we also developed a model of ritual revision. So we're talking about the ritual artifacts and the ritual scripts of performance. And over here we're talking about the ritual mobilizers, the people that help create this, and the amplifiers, the media and the press. And then we talk about the strategy of how these took place, we compare them to morality plays during the Middle Ages, co-optation, pathologization, the megaphone effect, which is amplifying what's happening, and the benefits, effectance that people are having, doing something, having an effect, explaining, expiation of evil and fear, alleviation of fear, and community cohesion that these rituals are. So it's looking at the function of the ritual and how the rituals change in order to respond particularly to the COVID. And so we published this in, I think, Consumption, Markets, and Culture. And Vikram Kapoor, I think I've mentioned before, was the first author on this. Here's another one, in analyzing qualitative data based on interviews, visuals, and observations. I'll just tell you that this was in the Middle East. This was in United Arab Emirates. And what do you see in this picture?
People are waiting.
A couple of ladies that are completely covered in black.
Won't come.
And who are the people in the foreground? Westerners, visiting. This is in a shopping mall. What is there about this image that their eyes are sort of making contact? What is that saying? What do you suppose that these people are
Hijab.
doing?
It's called hijab.
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 The dress is
Yeah.
called hijab.
The abaya and sheila and niqab. That's what they're wearing, all black. How are they regarding each other? What's it, you don't have to necessarily say that this is true, but what might be going on in the heads of each of these groups of people?
The Westerners are surprised to some extent. An element of surprise can be observed.
Yeah, they call them black ghosts sometimes.
Greatly.
And what about the opposite? How are the women regarding men here?
They're used to. They're used to with this kind of eyes because they're already like married for so many years. The generations, they are using this kind of attire, and the people, they look at them in that sense. So
Okay.
they are used to with their like those kind of curious eyes.
Okay, is there tension here, or are these people going to sit down together and start talking?
No.
No, that's not going to happen. These are two different cultures that are meeting each other, and so the question is, with these different cultures, how do they regard one another? What's going to happen in the future? It's normally, we did some interviews of hotel managers, we did it in Qatar and UAE and Dubai, and they were training their employees, and they said, normally you should respect the guest by looking them in the eye. But here you should not do that, and it's violating their privacy. But it's more complex than that. We started with young college women, and they would dress like this, but underneath they would have red heels and blue jeans and other Western clothes. They'd begin to leave some buttons unbuttoned, and so they were partly saying, I'm traditional, I'm fitting into my society's expectations, but underneath my heart is Western, that I want to dress in a modern sort of way. So they were trying to walk the tightrope. And you might think that this is a style that's unchanging, the black on black, but that they would have Swarovski jewels, the patterns would change, and they're relatively expensive, and every month or two the styles would change, but these are fairly rich cultures, so they could afford that. What would happen would be that in this particular case, the men's campus and the women's campus at the universities were separate for undergraduates. For graduates, they were together, men and women. But although no one told them to do this, the men sat on one side and the women sat on the other, so they're still keeping this division. And they found various ways to flirt and so forth. So with the study of clothing, which was the initial focus, we also looked at privacy in homes and some other things. We began to unravel the clothes, if you will, that we're trying to see what the... And the context matters too. So university is a relatively open, liberal space. On the other hand, other venues were not. The reception for a wedding was entirely separate for women and men might be telecast to the women's, but not vice versa. And in fact, the women would either take off their abayas in this women's reception or wear transparent ones. But the cell phones were confiscated at the door, so they wouldn't take a picture of another woman and show it to men in their family. So the notion of privacy. And partly these women said, I really like wearing this because I can go out without doing my hair, without doing my makeup. I don't have to worry about that. I just throw this on and go to the mall or whatever it might be. They used to only be able to go to the mall if they had a male escort from the family, but now they can go independently. All kinds of interesting stories that came up here about flirtations and love marriages and so forth. Okay, so grounded theory then we're using open coding after you've read through all the data, when you're familiar with it, you begin to put on these codes. Then axial coding, examining the codes, expanding, collapsing, adding new codes, doing it again, you can recycle through these. And then the selective coding for patterns of meaning, asking what more abstract concepts might apply here. Conceptual meanings, we're beginning to get to more academic understandings of what's going on rather than just literal understandings of what people said. And then the abductive reasoning is a follow-up strategy, sort of stepping back from the data and saying, okay, what is this all about? What is the macro story here, or the mega story of what's happening? Something that is an explanation of answering the why question that might make it all make sense. Not everyone comes up with an original interpretation like this, but try to come up with an original interpretation. And if you have to fall back on an existing theory, and that's one that fits best, that's fine too. But try first to have a more original interpretation.
Professor,
Yeah.
can you elaborate the abductive reasoning a little bit so that it can be?
Yeah, let's go back to that prior image. So you could begin coding, well, what is this person wearing, and what color is it, and how old are these people, and what is the pieces of clothing that exist here, what is the context, the background. You could begin to code all of those things. So you're throwing codes at it initially. These are the open codes. And then you begin to do axial coding, and you say, well, the colors don't matter as much as whether it's colorful or black. We'll use that as the code, and it contrasts these two groups. And the context is important because it's a private place, that a private person or persons own the mall, but nevertheless it's pretty open, that anyone can come, or almost anyone can come. The security people might throw prostitutes out if they're trying to attract business in the shopping mall, and other quote-unquote undesirables. But it's a pretty open space. And so the two groups come into contact, which might not be the case in the mosque, or might not be the case in a bar, for example, because those are taboo to the other groups almost. And so we're beginning to sort of say what is here, what isn't here, what's surprising here, what isn't surprising. And so then we begin to do that, and we begin to think about in the selective stage, what's really going on here. These are lifestyle differences, they're also religious differences.
Cultural differences.
Cultural differences. Okay, so cultural differences is a sort of mega theme that we're coming up with here, and cultural contact is what we're looking at. And so the story here, although it's not just based on this piece of data, but also interviews with people in both groups and so forth, is about all the things that make this culture different from this culture. Western and the Middle Eastern, for example, or Muslim and Christian, perhaps. And so we're beginning to, and this is, again, not just based on this photo, but on multiple photos and multiple interviews that we've done. We didn't do this particular one. This is just a photo that I pulled out, and I'm imagining what might be the other parts of the data that might go into this grand interpretation. But the abductive code is saying, well, what would make this make sense? And so we're saying, well, if the shopping mall is a mixing bowl and it mixes people together, or it doesn't mix people together, it uses some of this and some of that, and it allows both. How do those, is there friction here? Is there tension here? Are they melding together over time? What is the story that would help make sense of the phenomena, or phenomena plural, that are being portrayed in this photo? And I'm making the photo here the focus of what we're trying to understand, but it's more than that. It's the culture conflict that we're looking at. And is that rough or is that smooth? We probably ask questions about, do you go to parties at these people's homes? And if so, what sort of party? How does that go? Usually the home is set up because these are wealthy people in big homes, so that there's a women's section and a men's section. And unlike how you might entertain going to someone's house and you all get together, men and women, and talk, and come in couples, there the women go off to one part of the house and the men go off to another part of the house and they entertain each other. The men's majlis may be actually a separate building for wealthy people on the compound that they're dealing with. And so we begin to learn these cultures. And actually I was doing several research projects with a Palestinian woman who had moved to Qatar and was on the University of Qatar staff. And her sisters were there also, and so we were interviewing them. One of them had married a local Qatari man, actually the son of the boss, and so she had sort of special privileges. But it gave us access to people. We began to go to spaces like this as well. But we mostly were doing the research in people's homes, and there are various rituals that take place to welcome a guest in the home. And they come with incense, and you can waft it into your jacket or your abaya, and then you carry out the smell from this home, and you smell good, and it looks like this person was a good host. They sometimes get perfumes to put on before you leave as well. The food is very important. The kitchen is separate from the rest of the house, so it doesn't contaminate the food in the house. But Arab hospitality is a big thing. Traditionally, you should welcome a guest into your home for 3 days before you ask who they are, what they're doing there. And that isn't always carried out today, but that's the ideal. At any rate, trying to understand another culture is very rich. And of course, there are many cultures within India, and so you can do this within India. You can do it within your city, probably, by going to a different part of the city, and you're defamiliarizing yourself in that way. Oops, going in the wrong direction. Okay, so what we're trying to do with codes is to take all of these documents and pull out the parts that relate to a particular theme. This is more in the selective coding on the right. So we're indexing, basically, and we're retrieving various segments of the data. Here's a more concrete example. This was at a swap meet, and this was sort of the open initial coding. And you can't read all of this from where you are, but it says there were only 2 instances of bargaining in general. I've observed the tendency among prospective people that we might interview, simply to inquire about price and then move on as if price is not attractive. The bargaining sequences I observed look like this. Here's a toolkit. Here's they're bargaining about a can opener, and there's a $5 request from the seller and a $1.50 bid from the buyer, and it goes back and forth until they get to a selling price somewhere in the middle of $2.25. Additional comments on the range of goods available at Tanga Valley Swap Meet: ceramic Sacred Heart, ceramic Death's Head with swastika, not the Indian type, baseball caps with triking. I'm not sure what triking is right now. Slogans in velvet paint. At any rate, we coded initially bargaining, price inquiry, bargaining sequence, religion, art, kitsch, local icons, weapons, sports, and so forth. And then some of those began to, at the next stage of coding, go on to more aggregate codes: competition, purposive, hedonic. We're beginning to have a little bit more abstract codes. And then eventually we get to putting these together, and then we sort of step back and say, okay, what is swap meet bargaining all about? That's what we decided to focus on. Is this a competitive thing? Is it a playful thing? Is bargaining welcome in this particular context as opposed to having fixed prices? And why is that? What is that all about? We begin to see initial ideas. Let me show you one other example. This is about coffee connoisseurship, and this was actually from some work that Rob Cosmas did, some of his initial codes. Let me just read you part of this and see if it makes any sense. I realize part of the results may be due to my experience in pulling shots. Oh, this is for someone that's in an interview, or fluke of nature, or I'm using Garcia Espresso, Super Jolly Grinder, Panamanian Barn Green. Anyway, I read Roasted in a Franken Roaster. Anyway, I read Blank's opinion on trying to low to no tamp, adjusting the flow rate by a finer grind. Opinion of trying a lot of no tamp. Whoops, did I mix two lines together? Oh. It does work, a nice tiger fleck crema, fairly black, consistent shot time. So as most things, espresso are Italian. I am dubbing this the so-and-so ini method. And part of this probably seems incomprehensible. What is a Panamanian barn green? What is that all about? What is crema? And what is the tamp? If you know espresso, some of these terms may make sense, but you really have to be a connoisseur to understand what's happening here. This was part of a study by a Brazilian, well, this was Rob Kosmits. I'm mixing it together with another study of coffee connoisseurship in Brazil. What you might look at is, besides interviewing people, observing what's happening. What happens when people go to a coffee shop and order an espresso? And do they signal with a vocabulary like this to the barista that I can really appreciate fine coffee? Don't just treat me as a regular customer who puts creams and syrups and so forth in their coffee, but I want a particular shot of just espresso. And there's a ritual to consuming it, there's a ritual to making it, and so forth. So observation plus interviews in this case would probably make the most sense. So we've been through this: open coding, actual coding, selective coding, and abductive reasoning. Abductive reasoning also looks through the data and tries to find anomalies, surprises, and puzzles, and asks, what might this be a case of? How do we resolve this? We don't draw outliers, as we were talking about before, but rather we're trying to understand them. I don't think I have it to present, but there was a study done by an anthropologist of people in Côte d'Ivoire in Africa, Ivory Coast, and he looked at a group of young men who were petty thieves. They would do something like steal someone's smartphone and then sell it to someone else, and then they dressed as police and came and confiscated the phone they just sold by saying this is stolen merchandise, and went through the whole thing again. At any rate, they were at an outdoor bar one evening, and they were buying lots of beers. They had their cell phones prominently displayed on the table. They told the wait person not to take away the bottles. They wanted to show how much they had consumed. There were women there in wax print dresses. The men were wearing brand name clothes with not high-end brands, but medium-end brands, Nike and so forth. And they were displaying themselves prominently, flashing their money around, pulling out cash to pay for the alcoholic beverages. And the kicker was, the next day these men did not have enough money to feed themselves. And so the question was, the anomaly, the surprise, why were they spending their money in this way? And there are various possible explanations. Maybe this was binging. It's like soldiers or miners or people that work in the forest go off in a camp for men and are away from the city, away from family, if they have any. And then they come back to the town, the city, and they spend their money in this fashion. Maybe this is the case of binging. Or maybe it's spending their money with their mates in order to develop camaraderie and not to have to spend it on their family, because if they go back home, they have to share it with their family. Or maybe this, anyway, you go through several different possible explanations. What he came up with was that this is a way of sort of faking a higher status lifestyle than these men are actually able to afford. And then he thought about, well, how does this make sense in this particular culture? And he remembered when the young men go off to initiation, they go off into the forest, and then they come back and they're men at that point rather than boys. And they also put on decorative costumes and dance out around as the spirits of the ancestors and the spirits of the forest. And their relatives who are around in a circle around the performance realize that's their brother or that's their cousin, but they don't call that out. They don't say, hey, how are you doing, Joe? But they rather respect them as the spirits that they're portraying. And in fact, they themselves, when they put on these outfits, feel they are becoming the ancestor, the spirit that they're representing. At any rate, he remembered that, and he said, that's what's going on here. These men are bluffing. They're portraying something that isn't really them, but it's an open secret that no one calls out. No one says, hey, you're acting like a big shot, but I know you're really just a poor man who does these little scams and earns some money and so forth. And so he said, that's what's going on here as well. These men are bluffing. They're portraying something that's an open secret that no one calls out. And so he was focusing on what is surprising, what is an anomaly, and you have the magic touch. And then trying to make sense of it. And he made sense of it by this metaphor of one thing representing another, and the same sort of phenomenon going on in both contexts. Okay, so we're back. So that's sort of what I mean by objective reasoning. I wish I had time to go through that more thoroughly. Some possible inputs into an interpretation that you might come up with of the data. It could be prior theory. And I think I've said this before, an open mind need not mean an empty head. And so go ahead and read the literature. You don't have to do that for this presentation on Friday, but ultimately for the research project, you should be informed of what people have interpreted in similar sorts of contexts, similar sorts of phenomena in the past. So that's one possibility. Or prior research findings, and read broadly in other disciplines as well. Or your contextual knowledge, the fact that you know Indian cultures, or at least some Indian cultures, means that you're familiar, you're an insider, you know what some of the things like these entryway contexts mean that I don't know. I have to talk to people and get them to explain as if I were a child trying to ask about these things. And in fact, that childlike openness, I mentioned Howie Becker, the sociologist who was also a jazz musician, who didn't say that I'm an expert and so let's talk about this. He said, how could a jazz ensemble actually jam and spontaneously get together and make music? He knew the answer because he did this, but he asked to explain as if he were a 12-year-old trying to understand the phenomenon. Primary data, triangulating across different types of data, interviews, observations, and so forth, or among different members of the research team. Or it could be, again, these are inputs for theory building, a novel you read, a film you saw, a comment you heard, an expression you know, a dance performance, a canoe trip, whatever. Look for analogies, thinking of one explanation in a new context, that it makes sense in the context of recreation, but this is not recreation, so what is it all about? So the steps are basically categorized. This is the coding, the open coding, abstraction, this is the latent or the axial, comparison, triangulation, purpose of sampling the people that you decide to talk to, dimensionalization, continuous, like sacred and profane, where does this lie on that continuum, integration, your building theory with selective coding, iteration, sort of tacking back and forth. A sailboat can't go directly into the wind, but it can tack left and tack right. And you sort of go back and forth between the data and the interpretation, or between the literature and the data, and the literature and the interpretation. And then refutation, that negative case analysis, challenges for that interpretation. Other people in the group can say, oh yeah, that makes sense, but what about this interview where someone said the opposite? And so you begin to try to make sense of that as well. So, here's some entry points into, if you're grading a paper in particular, think about what the opening paragraph, try to write the opening paragraph, because that has to say, what is the study all about, what the paper does, why is it interesting, and what does it contribute? What did we find here? What did we learn here? What are we contributing to understanding this phenomenon or this process? It's also true that description transforms data, maybe puts it into more abstract academic categories and terms, but interpretation transcends data. And this is going back to abductive reasoning. We're backing away from the detailed codes that we've done in grounded theory, and we're trying to say, what might this be a case of? What aha experience can we have in trying to say what this is all about? So once again, description transforms data, but we need to go beyond description, and to do that, we need to recognize that interpretation is a process that transcends data. It looks at the data, but then it says, well, looking at this more broadly and putting in some other interpretations, this is what this is all about. We're not looking at the detailed, open axial coding in order of backing away. That is, theory, well, it must be consistent with the data, comes from the researcher. It comes from your brain, yourself, basically, what you know. And that knowledge is from having read broadly, thinking about your own experience, thinking about movies you've seen, and so forth. And also you can use the process of brainstorming. Brainstorming, as you know, is a process where you toss out ideas without anyone critiquing them. And so that can be in your group, or you could even do this individually, where you're writing down maybe and thinking of what might this be a case of, what is a possible relevant theme here. And so that can be a generative sort of thing. We can also distinguish primary and secondary process thinking. I don't think I have that on the next slide. Primary process thinking is when you, yeah, go ahead.
So, in some of the cases, whenever we are having the encounter with the contrasting observations.
Right.
So, contrasting observations, like there is a role of a researcher to filter out. So, there may be a kind of chance of self-bias. So, how to overcome that? Because in some of the cases, some of the interviews, we have identified that there are so many positive things or the things coming in the same direction. Some are completely different. So in that sense, how to mix the both or combine the both in a positive direction, or it may be in a proper direction.
Okay, well, we are human beings, and we come to something with a prior understanding. This is what I think about covered women in the Middle East. But I then start to, I have a female co-researcher who's going with me. We go into people's homes and talk to them. We interview them. We learn what this is about. And in order to do that, we sort of try to keep an open mind, but we still have our position. And I can't be a woman, and she can't be a man, and difference in ages and so forth. So we're taking advantage of those different perspectives rather than trying to hold them at a distance. We do try to keep an open mind as much as possible, but we realize that that may not be possible, and it may be that I will understand differently than a woman would understand it. And it may be that she will get better interviews if she talks to women independently and I'm not there, and maybe I can do the same with men without her being there, because this is a culture where strangers are not supposed to necessarily meet and get together across genders. There's some sensitivity there. But by going into these people's homes, by having them, we might eat with them, we might serve food to them, we're trying to understand. If we do that during Ramadan, it's a different sort of context than doing it in other days of the year and so forth. So by intimacy, if you will, by getting people's confidence, by talking to them, gradually our biases begin to fade away, we begin to change, we begin to understand, and that's part of the reason that we're doing this in the first place, that we got a grant to do this, and part of the grant was to say, this is trying to open Western minds to Eastern or Middle Eastern ideology, and to try to build understanding. And so that's, we did some videos in this case, as well as written papers. So that's what we told the granting agency, and they gave us some money to do the research. So I was saying, what was I saying?
Next page. Next page.
It was about primary and secondary analysis. Primary these are both Freudian concepts initially, but primary process thinking is open and playful and non-judgmental. It's accepting, whereas secondary process thinking is rigorous, it's precise, it's evidence-based. And so the idea is that we get ideas, but the initial primary process thinking. But then we have to write that up in a way that is, in terms of secondary process thinking, showing the evidence, trying to ground this, trying to be more rigorous than the ideas that we got in the primary process thinking. I'll try to illustrate that. One thing that we could do, this is from an article by Murray Davis, an old one, that's saying, that's interesting, is the name of the article. How do you make something interesting? Well, you can change differences in form. What appears to be multidimensional is really unidimensional measures, evidence, methods, assertions, values, separation, supply. What appears to be a fixed resource is not. These are just some possibilities, but the idea is to find something interesting because it presents a new point of view, because it may be surprising, because it may seem contradictory to common wisdom. Being interesting is not saying what everyone already knows. It's saying something new that you've brought to the table in your interpretation of your deep understanding of this phenomenon. The power of analogy. Each of these things on the left, which are naturally occurring things, have generated each of the things on the right. There's a one-to-one correspondence. So birds hooks that you go through a field, and these are the things that stick to your leggings. This was invented by a Canadian, led to Velcro, looking at that as a metaphor, an analogy. Genghis Khan's bow, these were people on horseback that had small bows that they could use on horseback, sort of recurved, led to the new Airbus skin that stretched itself in a particular way. At any rate, you can maybe see what some of these others were that were the inspiration for the technology on the right. You have access to these slides, so you can play with this more if you'd like to. But we don't have as many metaphors and a consistent metaphor in marketing and consumer research as finance does. Finance has all of these metaphors that are looking at money as being a liquid that flows and that, cash flow. We talk about currency, even banks, for banks. These are metaphors that are extended metaphors in finance. And the idea is to push a metaphor as far as you can and find where it breaks down, because it will break down eventually. Yes, it's similar, and yes, we can think about liquids, but sometimes cash is an object, or currency is something that is not flowing, it's in the bank, it's a reserve, whatever. So push the metaphors as far as they go. How do I go about it? This is my desk at home. You can see some stacks of books here for particular projects, some file folders with printed articles and scale books on top, and a little laptop. The Guinness beer is optional. You don't have to have that as part of the research procedure, but it happens to be in the shop. So what do I do? When I read a book, this is a 2011 book by Sherry Turkle called Alone Together, Why We Expect More of Technology and Less from Each Other. I do my own index. There's an index in the back, but I create my own one with words that I think, or themes that I think are relevant and important in the book, and page number. And then I circle, use colored markers to indicate those that I'm particularly interested in for a particular project. At any rate, it's a habit. It's a way that I go about reading a book. I may not be the way that you want to go about reading a book. Then you have a beginning, and to begin a project, not necessarily in this week-long workshop, but normally immerse yourself in the literature. I mentioned tacking back and forth with more literature, roughing out an outline, throwing away the outline, as almost inevitably happens, and then trying it out, presenting it at conferences and universities for feedback, or talk to other people in your group, work out a joint understanding. This is the beginning of for a particular project. Also trying to not just be mediocre, but be great. Rather than being toilers in the vineyard, you want to be the vintners rather, who are creating the wines. Professional freedom allows us the ability to have research problems, different approaches, different ideas, different outlets. And the profession, academia, awards creativity, great inspiration, inspires others, and living a life that matters. This is Ernst Becker's in Escape from Evil. He says, what we really fear is not so much extinction, but extinction with insignificance. We want to know that our life has somehow counted, if not for ourselves, and at least in the larger scheme of things, that it is left to trace, a trace that has meaning. And so, as Nike says, greatness is a choice. These are some objectives that I've heard from people. I'm not creative. I can't do this exercise. There's a bias in the field or the journals that favors North Americans, that favors men, that favors Ivy League schools and so forth. I'm too old. I'm too young. It's all been done. It's too risky. I have to wait and be safe until after the thesis, after promotion, after tenure. I talk to doctoral students and I say, well, I like the stuff that you do, but my committee would never go for that. My supervisor would never understand. Or they say, well, I like it, but after my thesis, then I'll do that. And then they get a position in a university and they say, well, after I get promoted, then I'll do that. And then they say, well, after I retire, then I'll do that. They keep postponing it and never quite get there. So take a chance. A chance is a path to greatness, and at the same time, as Einstein said, there's only one road to human greatness. It's through the school of hard knocks. Try and fail. Failure is something that we learn from, and technology, innovation comes in this way as well as academic creativity. What is great research? Original, important ideas, simplicity and elegance. It's not complicated. Broad implications, well written, well produced, a joy to read, watch, or hear, and again, interesting. That's a criteria. And we'll go through an exercise maybe in a moment to see how that might be done. What is not great research? It's not these things, so it's just the opposite. Mediocrities, the supposed Greek philosopher would say that we should just be good enough rather than great. So what is not great research? An interesting context only. That's not enough. A formulaic account, bang, bang, boom, that's how it is. An incremental contribution to knowledge. Application of a theory from another discipline rather than creating our own. A variation on a theme, the latest buzzwords and research trends. If doctoral students ask, what's a hot topic right now? Ignore whatever you hear or don't ask that question, because by the time you start researching it, it's already been done. It's sort of too late. So that's not a good thing to ask. Or the uninterpreted finding. That's also not great research. So think big, ignore boundaries, have fun, read promiscuously. I encourage my students to read anything and everything, high and low. Pick interesting projects, interesting co-authors or mentors. Start at the top in terms of journals that you submit to. You can always go down, but it's hard to go up if it gets rejected. Conferences, blogs, emails are a way to try out the emails, kind of old-fashioned, list servers, WhatsApp, whatever. Pursue multiple projects. Ideally, one at the beginning, one where you're just getting ready to send it off, you've done the analysis, and one that's off to the journal or under review and revision. So you don't just finish your thesis and then, well, what now? But you've got another project which you've begun. Research grants, I wouldn't encourage going for research grants unless they're open and give you money to go to conferences and things. Otherwise, they may be leading you in a direction that you don't want to go. They're a little too precise. At least early on, it may not be the best thing to do. But do think about research streams, that someone can look at your projects and say, oh yeah, I can see a theme that is tying these together, or there's two themes actually, the two branch off, and begin to diversify it. Publishing, simple singular ideas that are well reasoned and well constructed. Don't just review the literature, critique it and synthesize it, pull it together. It's not enough to carve out your place, but also show your original contribution. So saying there's a gap is not enough, because there may be a gap for a reason. There's nothing interesting in that particular context, or it's something that is simply too trivial. Reject and revise. Read carefully. I was just looking at a co-author who said, oh, my paper's been rejected. And in fact, in the first sentence, it did say, your paper is rejected for the special issue, but we invite you to resubmit it for the journal's regular issues. We think it has promise. So read carefully, always revise substantially. Don't try to please all the reviewers. Try to please the editor or the associate editor of the journal, and what he or she says is important. And target the editor and associate editor in your responses with just a little bit for the individual reviewers beyond that. Miscellaneous tips. KISS is an acronym, keep it simple, stupid. I don't mean to disparage older women, but I used the grandmother test. Would my grandmother be able to understand what I'm writing from reading this report? Don't try to be esoteric. Try to be transparent. Read some of your favorite authors. Use short sentences, concise themes, and then prune. Creativity and Metaphor. There's a couple of books by Roger Von Oak, Whack on the Side of the Head and A Kick in the Seat of the Pants, which are trying to loosen you up to be more creative, not to have blinders on. Don't cite textbooks. Kotler said so-and-so. That's not an original contribution. It indicates that you're not going back to the original sources, which you should be doing, rather than textbooks. Journals want theory, and an article should both have legs on which it's expanded, and that's the evidence you're building on, and wings. And this is the sort of transcendent idea of quoting that you're soaring on these wings, despite the fact that you have evidence, you have legs to stand on. The theory, the original interpretation is the wings that allow that article to take off. Okay, here's the primary and secondary process thinking that I was looking at. Soft metaphors, humor, play, etc., versus hard logic, reason, precision, and consistency. This is how you get ideas. This is how you convey the ideas in terms of the write-up of the paper, which should also contain that original creativity, the ideas that you're original. Look in very different fields. Don't just look in marketing. Anyone can look for fashion and boutique, history in a museum. The creative person looks for history in the hardware store and fashion at the airport. Newt Rockne was an American football coach at Notre Dame, and he had this particular formation called the Four Horsemen that was people would sort of form a V and they would go down the field, and the person carrying the ball, trying to get it to the goal line, was behind them. So they would plow the blocker, the tacklers out of the way and allow that person to go forward and score. He got that idea from a New York Rockettes performance where they were kicking up their legs and they happened to be in that V formation. It had nothing to do with football, but he got the idea that was looking at that formation. John von Neumann got his idea of human behavior by looking at poker table behavior, people playing cards. World War I military camouflage. Any idea where, and that's what we normally think of as camouflage, where camouflage ideas came from? Say it again.
Chameleon.
Indian?
That camouflage idea.
Camels. I'm hearing camels.
Camouflage idea.
Camouflage. Of
Chameleon that gives a
Chameleon.
it actually came from birds and how birds camouflage themselves with predators and other
Changing
animals.
colors, kind of, changing colors.
Yeah, and they change colors for chameleons, and so we're sort of blending in to the background. On the other hand, World War II, the U.S. had an unbreakable military code because they had code talkers.
Enigma.
Yeah, Enigma machine, but this was something a little bit different. This was Navajo Indians who would transmit and also receive these messages. And even if the Germans or the Japanese were able to intercept the message, none of them spoke Navajo, so they couldn't decode it. They couldn't interpret what it was saying, or if they could decode the words, they didn't know what the words meant. Finally, Charles Kettering worked for General Motors, and I don't know if you know, there's something called pre-ignition in a car or a motorbike. You turn it off and it continues to go, or it used to, at least they sort of cured that problem with additives and gasoline. But what he found to add to the petrol was iodine. And the way that he found iodine was he noticed this flower that was the first one to bloom, and this is like pre-ignition, in the spring, called the trailing arbutus. And it was red. And he looked around the lab for something red and found the iodine, he put it in, and lo and behold, that solved the problem of pre-ignition. But it's nothing that logically transpired. It was just the metaphor in this case. Okay, here's an exercise. If you've ever watched Sesame Street, you've probably seen something like this. Here's A, B, C, D, and E, 5 different figures. Which of these things is not like the others? Which of these figures is unique compared to the others? B,
C is not
C,
very, C is
D,
not very.
E. You're all right. All of these answers are correct. A is the only one that has only curved lines. B is the only one that has only straight line. C is the only one that's asymmetric. D is the only one that has a straight and a curved line. And E is the only one that looks like a Euclidean triangle projected in non-Euclidean space. So if you're clever enough, each of these answers is correct. The difficulty is that children go to school and basically have all the creativity beaten out of them. They're told that grass is green, not gray, and the color between the lines, and there's only one right answer. All of those are sort of taking the natural creativity of children and reining it into what we think they should be like. There's a woman, Debbie McGinnis at the University of Southern California, who says the best people to have a really creative idea are first-year doctoral students, because they too haven't had all the creativity beaten out of them by advisors and faculty who say, you can't do that, that's too ambitious, it's already been done, that'll never get published. And gradually they get shaped after the first year into more conforming sorts of people. So be original, don't assume there's only one correct answer. What is this? What do you see here? A dot? Any other? It's a full stop, a period. That might be some of the normal answers. But if you ask a child, this is the eye of a bat, or this is a telephone pole seen from the top, they have all these wonderfully creative answers, but you guys have had all the creativity beaten out of you, obviously. So you too are not able to come up with an original interpretation. So education to the contrary, there's more than one right answer. Children enter school as question marks and leave as periods, unfortunately. And the opposite, this is Neelotpaul, an atomic physicist, Nobel Prize winner. The opposite of a trivial truth is clearly false, but the opposite of a great truth is also true. And so light can be both a wave and a particle. And those are opposite sets of interpretations, but it's some of each. It can be both in these cases. Okay, so in conclusion, give yourself the freedom to be creative, enjoy everything in life, take a chance, look for inspiration everywhere, cultivate interesting friends and experiences, think big, and think simple. And so that's the end of the coding section early, so we have time for questions about what we've been talking about, or questions about your presentations coming Friday. Yes?
So in the coding section, when you said it can be open, initial and selective coding,
Right?
I just wanted to know whether the open codes can be in the form of short sentences. Like when we interview, they give long paragraph answers or something to the question.
Sure.
So can we shorten it down and in a single sentence and it can be termed as open code?
Yeah, what I would do is highlight that sentence, for example, but also give it a word, like I think you're saying. Say that's what this sentence represents. So this sentence is all about, if your project was building, for example, kinds of jumpers or something like that, or fit, how do you judge whether something fits or not. Something like that. So yeah, that would be a good starting point. And that could be a whole paragraph, you're right, it would just be a sentence. Good.
So you had mentioned you talk about how to analyze videos and without transcribing.
How to
Analyze videos without transcribing.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I didn't talk about that. You're right. What you could do, and you can do this with some of the software packages as well, is create a code that links to a particular part of the video. And so you have this on your computer. It's coding category, and so you punch in jumpers or sweaters, and it jumps to a part of the video where people are talking about. So what you gain in that case is how people are saying it and the context as well. Well, I guess the context you have to be careful of. You don't just take things by looking at that clip. You need to be familiar with the whole interview. But it links directly to the data, to hearing and ideally seeing the video recorder what the person has to say. And it's possible to do that with Atlas TI and with NVivo, for example, if you use those programs. For the purposes of this project, there's probably not time to utilize one of those, but in the future, and if you'd like to use one of those software packages, think about coding that without having to transcribe. It saves you that step, and it also preserves the data in its original form, so you can hear and see rather than just read what someone's saying.
So,
Yeah.
Like some of the journals, they ask for the double coding and multi-coding or coding validation by the outsider or the third party. How it is relevant in this context?
I would push back if they're asking you for a third party to look at your data and see if it's consistent with your coding or your interpretation. Because I think that's positivist criteria. You're looking for a neutral, unbiased judge to say whether this matches or not. We did that early on, and we went to some sociologists, and they said, well, I can do this, and I will do this for you, but I would much rather rely upon my reading of your interpretation. I can tell whether you've gotten deep, good interviews and observations from reading the final product more than I can looking at how the individual little pieces go together with the final conclusion. And especially if you're getting to abductive coding, sort of standing back from the data and saying, here's an idea, a theory, an interpretation that helps us make sense by going beyond, by using metaphor and analogy. That's how I interpret this data. I don't think you can look at the pieces and have someone say, yes, I approve, this is an adequate, that's a positivist criteria rather than an individual criteria. So if necessary, I would go to an attorney, or I would try to really shake up the editor and say, look, this is the wrong criteria, or review it. And say, I thank you for your suggestion, but this is positivistic, whereas I'm doing an interpretive piece of this.
Thank you.
So you can push back. Other comments, questions, questions about the final project? Yeah.
Because since we're talking about WhatsApp as well, WhatsApp.
Yeah.
So, there are so many groups that we are part of, but WhatsApp is end-to-end encrypted. So can we look for analysis and use that data?
Yeah, you're talking about normal conversation that you already had on WhatsApp.
Yeah, or there are some groups like I'm a part of groups like running groups or practicing for marathons,
Okay.
or book readers or movie lovers. So if those are the communities that I want to study,
Absolutely, those WhatsApp conversations on the whole group would be useful. It doesn't necessarily mean that you want to put the runners together with the book readers, for example, because they're probably...
yeah, that's separate cities.
Yeah, but absolutely, I think within those naturally occurring groups, it would be great to have.
Okay.
Even though you're a part of it yourself.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's true. So draw on anything and everything, including WhatsApp groups that you're familiar with, that you've interacted with, and other materials that bears upon it. And that includes prior studies in the literature, it includes other people's theories that you're transporting from one discipline to another to better understand it. And it includes your own coding and analysis.
But from paper's point of view, how do we cite or refer to these groups?
I would say WhatsApp group on runners, and if you can give the link to it that people could look at, that's even better. But if you might not be asked for a third party to look at your data, but you might be asked to show me the original codes. The journal could ask for that. And in that case, you could show them whatever you came up with. It could be scratchings on a napkin, serviettes that you created, or it could be logical step-by-step coding.
Screenshots of
Yeah, if they ask for that, you can overwhelm them with the other. Here's all of my raw data, here's all of my codes. Chances are, without spending hours trying to see whether that makes sense, you're overwhelming. But you're showing that this is real data. We've talked about the fact that experiments sometimes have falsified data, false data. It's almost impossible to deal with qualitative research. It's easy to just use the real data rather than try to imagine but that's the fear that's asking for it. Yeah. Other questions, comments? We can go to lunch early. Yeah.
So for the project, do we want to do anything further analysis or
The question is, are we required to do further analysis beyond what you're presenting in the project? No. I mean, you can, and you may well have at least the start of a project that you might want to go further with and try to publish. But you're not required to do everything that you might ultimately want to do with the data. And I should mention for the presentation, stick to 10 minutes. And so whether it's a video or a PowerPoint presentation or a skit, whatever you want to do, 10 minutes per group. So it's just going to be the highlights of the finding. And I guess one other thing on the presentation, you don't have to spend time talking about the methods. You can say we did observation, we did interviews, and we did an auto-ethnography. If you decide to go that way, that was just a suggestion. Because we all have that same thing. So just mentioning the methods without saying in detail how you went about it, and the interpretation is fine. But you should do something about, this was the research question that we're trying to understand. This is how we went about going to the conclusion. That's all it is. The data collection process, it's sufficient to say we interviewed people, it was a convenient sample, and you don't have to look more into that. Unless it's useful for your project, we were looking at elderly people and their ability to use technology, something of that sort. So that's an important note to make. Unless it's relevant to the data, we say more than we observe some people. Anything else today?
So thank you everyone. Today's session is over. After 12:45 you can have your lunch as per your convenience. Next session will be tomorrow at 9 a.m.
Thank you.
Thank you.